أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we have a little bit more to continue from last week where we started the vertical order. And when we finish that, then we'll move on to the next section, which is the horizontal order. So the last section in the vertical order, so we described that there's two different ways of looking at reality, right? So you have the material world, the dunya, and then you have, has its own order, which is part of the horizontal, which we'll talk about today, inshallah. And then you have this world of vertical order or creation, starting with Allah, then the angels, and then amongst the angels, there's different levels of angels. And then from there, you come down to the dunya. So this is talking about how existence happens, and there's hierarchy there. And then over here is about material cause and effect, which we'll talk about today, inshallah. So this was the vertical order. And we talked about how things are ranked, that it's not some man-made idea, that this was based on real values of things, and that Allah gives one command, and from that one command, everything else starts to come from there. And this is where you get one of these examples in the Quran of how when people see seeming contradictions in the Quran where it seems like it's talking about, okay, well, does Allah do it? And then somewhere else Allah says, well, the angels are doing it, and then sometimes He says, we do it. So the typical answer that people give is that it's the royal we, it's just a way of speaking. But according to the philosophers, they say, no, it's speaking about an actual reality here. It's talking about this vertical order. So the example that we gave in the Quran last time was in regards to tadbir, or management and governing of the world. That Allah says that He directs the commands. Right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yudabbiru al-amr min as-sama. He does tadbir, He manages everything. And then He says that there are mudabbirat, which are the angels. Another example is in terms of wahi itself, whether it's the Quran or any sort of wahi, that sometimes wahi is specifically described and attributed to an angel or some sort of other entity. So in Surah Al-Shu'ara, 26, ayat 193 through 194. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. نزل به الروح الأمين على قلبك. Just those two ayat. So the Ruh al-Amin, now there's a whole debate about what Ruh al-Amin, what does it actually mean? Some people say it's Jibreel alayhi salam, others say no, it's a separate creation altogether. But this trusted Ruh and spirit brought the wahi, the revelation upon your heart, right? Speaking to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So usually we sometimes have seen revelation being described as being done by Jibreel. Even when we're talking about it in other places, we say, yeah, Jibreel is the one who revealed the Quran to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. But then in other places, for example, Surah Al-Insan, Surah Al-Dahr, 76:23, you have Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna nahnu nazzalna alayka al-Quran tanzila. That without a doubt, we have sent down the Quran to you in tanzil, in a gradual descent. So in this other type of ayah, Allah is explaining that we are doing this. But again, there's no separation here. Yes, Allah is the first one to give the command, and then it comes down to one or more of the angels. So there's multiple causes and effect that are are part of the process. So there's no contradiction, and it's also not just semantics, and it's also not a random discussion as well. The last example that we'll go through is in terms of death. So we typically when we think about death, we usually think of Malikul Maut, right? It's the angel of death that will come and take away souls. So it's described in different ways. So, for example, Surah Al-Zumar, 39:42. You have Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahu yatawaffa al-anfus hina mawtiha. So it's Allah who's the one that takes souls at the time of their death, right? So in this first ayah, it's Allah who's saying He's the one who causes wafat. He's the one who's causing death. He's taking the souls. But then you go to Surah Sajda, 32:11. What do we have over here? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قُلْ يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ مَلَكُ الْمَوْتِ الَّذِي وُكِّلَ بِكُمْ ثُمَّ إِلَى رَبِّكُمْ تُرْجَعُونَ. Say, you will be taken away by the angel of death. That's how wafat is taking place. What? الَّذِي وُكِّلَ بِكُمْ. The one who's been made as a wakil, over you. Then you'll be brought back to your Rabb. So now in this ayah, it's being described that there's a specific angel that's supposed to be engaging in this wafat or taking of souls. So Allah's firstly described Himself as doing it, and then He's describing Malik al-Maut, like an actual angel of death that's doing it. And another final example we'll give is in Surah An'am 6, ayah 61. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ وَيُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَفَظَةً حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَ أَحَدُكُمُ الْمَوْتُ تَوَفَّتْهُ رُسُلُنَا وَهُمْ لَا يُفَرِّطُونَ. So Allah is saying He's qahir, that He has this dominating power over His ibad, His servants, His slaves, and He sends down His guards over you to protect you. Then, when death approaches any of you, تَوَفَّتْهُ رُسُلُنَا. Our messengers will cause this wafat. So now we've seen all three examples. We see Allah describing death towards Himself. Then He describes specifically Malakul Maut. And now He's saying that there's Rusul, that there's multiple agents that are involved in this too. And as we said, this makes sense because Allah is obviously the one who's the cause of all causes, giving that order. There's one specific angel in this hierarchy. Let's just say for example, Malik al-Maut is situated over here, right? And then there's obviously angels below him as well too that Malik al-Maut can order and have, engage in this behavior as well too. So it's one command from Allah that sets in a sort of chain reaction for things to take place. So there's no contradiction between saying, well, Allah saying He does it, and He's saying Malik al-Maut does it, and He's saying that there are various messengers. And just as a caveat, in case you haven't come across this before, Rusul, meaning one of the plurals of Mursil of Rasul, doesn't just mean prophets. It's also being used in this context and other contexts in the Quran. It's being used to describe angels as well too, workers, whatever you would call it. So Allah's literally just giving you this whole dynamic in death, and again this happens in Revelation, every other places too, describing this same whole process as well, right? So it's the exact same parallel. So this is not just something the philosophers are coming up with out of nowhere. It's describing what's already in the Quran. That it's Allah giving a command, that when He gives that amr, that one word, that one kalima, it causes, that command itself causes the creation of everything else that's needed for that command to take place. That's how everything works out. So again, this is just as a summary to everything that was just given as examples for today. And then what we said for last week for this vertical order is that Allah, His irada, when He has this, His insha'i as we call it, His will, when He wants to create and govern the world, these are not separate things that He's doing. It's like, okay, in one sense He's like, okay, I'm going to create something and then I'm going to govern it. I'm going to do this. It's not multiple things like you and I have to do. One single will, one single thing that Allah does takes care of everything. It's only one command that He does. And so it's creation and it continues, it has the order involved with it as well. So an example for us, we'll give a few examples, but just to make sure we understand it in a way that is really, let's say, intimate for us. So if, for example, I tell you, to think of an object, right? Think of a red balloon. When you think of a red balloon, do you have to do multiple processes in your mind? Do you have to say, okay, let me think about the color red, then let me think about a balloon, and then let me think about all the parts that go together? No, you do kun fayakun, and then you can think about that shape instantly. So our ability to create something, everything else is included within that as well too. We don't have to go through multiple steps, right? So Again, we're not trying to make an analogy between, like, that's the same way Allah operates, but it's just to show that when you bring something into existence, everything else that's necessary will happen. That's how this is what's taking place. And remember, when we talk about the vertical order, what we're talking about is, that's what it is. It's about bringing things into existence. And when we talk about the horizontal order today, we'll see the difference play out and why sometimes this can be confusing. But this is about how things come into existence and into being, which is different than you and I when we talk about the dunya. Okay. Now, before we move on, there's one last point to address before we end. What would happen if there was no vertical order? If there is no hierarchy of Allah giving this command and angels and this higher level order of cause and effect, what exactly would happen? Now, if you can't think about it yourself, again, because I know this concept's a little abstract, what would end up happening is this. Is remember, each of these angels is causing something very specifically directly. If this specific hierarchy was not there, let's say, again, from A to B to C, all the way down to, let's say, the dunya, then what would end up happening is, it's tough to kind of write this out, but if there is no vertical order like this that's following this natural, essential system of cause and effect, then that means anything could cause anything. If you don't have a specific chain of things happening, that means anything could cause anything. So Allah, being infinite, gives this one command which causes everything else. From that, the first essential thing, for example, let's just call it the Jibreel for now to keep it simple. Or, we can call it the intellect as well if you want, that makes it easier. The intellect, Jibreel, whatever. From there, then the second level of existence comes. It's all leading to something very, very specific. But let's say, well, why does it have to be this exact way? What if it's not there? If it's not there, then what we're saying is that, yes, it's possible then for something, for example, in the dunya, say you have a random human being, if you don't have this causing system, then what you're technically saying is that, you know what, that also means that a possible contingent, mumkin al-wujud, can cause anything, even, na'udhu billah, Allah. That an angel could also cause Allah. That a random, like a rock or a block, an inanimate object can cause an angel. When there is no specific structure and order, anything can be anything, which means chaos. So that's why, Shaykh Mutahari was very specific about the examples and the analogy to give of saying, 1, 2, 3. Think of it like a number line, that these are essential values that you're talking about. It's not random stuff. You can't swap 4 with 1. You lose all sense of value. That's what's happening over here. So if we don't have this vertical order, anything could cause anything, which also means anything could be an effect of anything. Which now means that yes, Allah can be an effect of something, which is impossible. So this is, for example, one of the issues that we have with religions that have this philosophy that Allah can do anything and be anything and become anything. Well, okay, that causes a problem, because they say, hey, why are you limiting God? Why are you saying that He can't have a son? Why are you saying that He can't become a human being? Well, if you do this, you're messing with the whole order of how essential values would be. If you're saying that any human, or this specific, for example, like Jesus, can become God, then there should be nothing stopping me from becoming God. There should be nothing stopping a rock from creating God, because now there's no sense of logic and order to these things. There's no hierarchy that's left anymore. So that's one of the absurdities that they call it, that comes from there. Even from the material world, even within this world, there would be weird examples. So right now, if you take a match, you light it, you'll get a small flame. That's all you'll get. If you don't have this specific system of cause and effect, then you'd be able to take a match, light it, and have the same amount of illumination that the sun gives off. Because there's no specific cause and effect. It only comes from a vertical system like this. So this would be the absurdities that are caused, that happens. So this is the reason why, in this world, because it follows this specific system, when you have fire and paper, when you put fire on paper, what happens? It burns. Why is it that when you take ice and put it on paper, it doesn't burn? Because ice doesn't have that effect. It doesn't give that from terms of cause and effect system. It doesn't have that ability. Fire has a specific nature that comes from values as it's passed down that allows it to give the effect of burning, that allows it to disintegrate certain objects. Ice doesn't have that ability. And ice, for example, will give the opposite effect. Ice will cool things down. Without a system like this, a vertical system, then fire would be allowed to freeze things, and then ice would be allowed to burn things. because everything would just be chaotic. So this is what happens. Okay. Okay, there's a few other examples we can give, but I think once we explain the horizontal order, I think it'll become clear. So we'll stop with the examples for now, and we'll move on to the next subsection, which is the horizontal order. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. All right, this is better. Okay. Okay. So now we're talking about the horizontal order, meaning we're in the material world now, we're in the dunya. So we already talked about the vertical, so we know that there's something above this. We already got that idea. So now we're just talking about the material world. Usually, when we think about cause and effect in the material world, if I were to ask, okay, this is me on a specific date and time, that's when that's when I was born, right? This is my birthday. On this specific day, this specific time, this specific place. If we were normally to think about ourselves or any other person, what would we say are the causes and effects for that? What is the cause and effect for our being and our existence, our life? Yeah, so we say, look, the cause there was mother and father. And then go back in time, they have their own parents, all right? On both sides. Now, obviously, you trace it back. This is typically how we think of cause and effect. Like, this great-great-grandparent caused this one, caused this one, caused this one, which caused my mother, and on a separate line caused my father, and then two of them together allowed and were causes for my birth. That's how we end up, thinking about things. So let's say this, right? This happened, whatever, I was born in, right, New Jersey. Now let's say the exact same time, somewhere else, let's say, whatever, somewhere in Florida, exact same date and time, you have somebody else is born. Now, for them, obviously they have the same sort of cause and effect, right? Parents, and it goes back and back and back. Is there any relation between two individuals, myself and some random person born on the same date in Florida? Say no. Well, what's the connection? They're born, okay, fine. You could say same exact time. Let's say to the millisecond same time. Fine. But they're completely different places, completely different lines of parents and ancestors. There's no relation whatsoever. What Shaykh Mutahari wants to establish in this subsection is not only are these two individuals related, but every single action that happens in the dunya, all of them are interconnected and related. I mean, besides, even the easiest way to explain it is, okay, everybody goes back to, Nabi Adam alayhi salam and Bibi Hawa. Okay, that's an easy way to explain it. But even beyond that, every single event that takes place in the universe, every single thing is related. So that's one thing he wants to establish. The other thing is explaining what are the principles behind how the world operates. This system that we think is cause and effect, he said this is not cause and effect. So let me give that word first so that we have an understanding. Now there's a fancy term that they use in philosophy, but basically any of these things or any of this, meaning parents, grandparents, those are needed for any person to be born. Everybody requires that. But that's not the only thing. In order for this individual to be born, what else is required for any person to be born, really? Besides parents, there's plenty of other things that are involved as well too. There are, let's say, the food that was required for this person to survive, the mother and father, that was necessary. If they didn't have that food, they wouldn't survive. If they didn't survive, they wouldn't be able to procreate, right? So all the other factors that are required, oxygen existing in this world, if that's not there, there's no humans at all. So you take all of those things together, and all of these things combined are known as preparatory causes. So they're not known as real cause, but a preparatory cause. Meaning, all of these things have to be there first. They have to exist. If they exist, then this thing can happen. Then this person can be born. If you want to take another analogy, I think the green ran out, so I can't do that. But let me use red. So if you think about any sort of plant, right, or any sort of tree, in order for that to grow, very simple, what do you need? Okay, you need sunlight, you need water, you need soil. Not only do you need those three things, but you also have to make sure alongside of that it's not just good soil, but predators don't come and eat the crops. Adverse, rain, weather doesn't get it. So it's not just these things that are there. You need generally speaking, a farmer or somebody to actually go and plant it. It is possible sometimes for a farmer not to plant a seed. Sometimes they can be planted, like wind blows a seed, and sometimes that happens. So that's also there. But then wind would be another necessary part of it as well too. Sometimes another animal will take a seed and put it somewhere. So that's also part of it. All of these things are necessary. Now, would we think of them as a cause? Are they bringing it into existence? No. They're not causing the existence, but they have to be present. They're prerequisites, if you want to call them that. Muqaddamat. If they're there, then the possibility for that thing to exist happens. There's a possibility of me existing if I have parents and if I have grandparents, and all these things are possible. And if there's food for them to eat, and oxygen, and a universe. All those things are required in order for any single thing to take place. Every event, every individual, whether it's an inanimate object or a conscious being, everything has these preparatory causes. He says that that's what the material world is made up of. It's a bunch of preparatory causes. In order for something to emerge, for Allah to give it that existence, remember going back to the vertical one, in order for Allah to command an angel, or the set of all these different angels, in order for that angel that's entrusted with putting the ruh inside of that child, right, at 4 months gestation, for example, that angel will only be able to do that if all these other things have been present as well too. So this is looking at it from, again, top-down existence, but this is looking at it in terms of what we call time and space, right? I didn't add this there too, but if you go back far enough, if you don't have the concept of time, if you don't have material and space, then you can't have this stuff either. Right? So all of these are just preparatory causes. That's what they're known as in philosophy. They allow for something to appear. That's what it is. Another way of thinking about it is an artist, going back to what we're thinking about, I have a specific masterpiece, a mural, something I want to draw. In order for that to happen, I have to have paint, I have to have a canvas or something to write on, I have to have a tool. If that happens, then that image that I have in my mind can emerge. It can come out and be seen now by individuals. Otherwise, it's just going to stay in my mind. And take the analogy for what it is. It's almost as if Allah has us in His mind as this creator and painter. In order for us to appear, then the dunya as a canvas needs to be there. There needs to be parents who are almost like paint or paintbrush, something like that. All these things are all helpful, necessary things in order for the thing to emerge. So that's how the sort of vertical and horizontal stuff work together. So another way that we can call it, besides preparatory causes, is you can also call it horizontal causes. Hence the name horizontal order, right? So that's the idea. This is counterintuitive to what we're used to, because we're used to thinking everything, this is what causes that. And we're not going to jump to it yet. This is one of the major issues that people face, especially atheists and agnostics, people who don't believe in God. It's because they're thinking only in these terms. And Shaykh Mutahari did mention this before as well too. They're like, well, cause, effect, fine. But they think that all of this is what leads to existence. And you can ask them a simple question. If, let's say, all of the materials are present, does it guarantee, for example, life? If you have the proper sunlight, proper water, soil, weather is good, there's no predators, does that seed absolutely turn and grow and turn into whatever tree or plant? No. So there's always some variable missing which causes something to exist. Now again, for us it's easy to say yeah, because you're not looking at it from top to bottom. You're looking at the higher order of things for that, the closest vertical one would be an angel coming and giving it quote unquote life. But obviously you go all the way back up and we say, yeah, this has to come from a command from Allah. If Allah doesn't command it, it's not going to happen. So we're able to fill in that gap. They're trying to fill it up like this, right? In this world, in the dunya, they think that they can fill in the gap just by looking at other preparatory causes. That's what science is trying to do. Well, there's some variable we missed. Well, there's always going to be variables you miss, sure. But that variable is never going to answer these questions. Think about consciousness, will. They're trying to figure this out based on the dunya as well too. Oh, we're going to find out the secret to consciousness. And still to this day they can't. They say for some reason people gain morality, they gain free will. We can't explain it with evolution. It doesn't work. And they've been trying for how many decades now. Why? Because they don't have this higher order up and down view of things. They only look left and right or horizontally. That's all they can see. And even very simply, the easiest way to push back is, hold on, how did time and space, how did even that come in the first place? You can only explain it if you have, again, this idea of vertical, of how time and space itself, or space-time even emerges. That can't be explained by physical causes. For those of you who have studied a little bit of, let's say, astronomy or physics, they talk about this idea of the Big Bang and Planck's moment, and the rules of math and science break down when you get to that moment, because in order for science to do science, you need time and space. You have to be able to calculate it. Well, those rules, they emerged. So they can't figure out, because their tools will break down. They can't calculate. They don't have a model for it. How did this stuff even start in the first place? We'd say, look, your answer is that you're looking materially when you should be looking immaterially. You have to be looking above, not side to side. Right? That's what they're trying to do. I had another analogy of a water park and a water slide, but I'll leave that one aside. Okay. So, are there any questions about understanding the difference between horizontal causes and vertical causes? Is that clear? No? Okay. But the next point that we have to try to get across is, okay, how does this explain everything being unified though? Shaykh Mutahari describes it as organic unity. Every single thing, everything in the dunya, everything is connected. Now I don't mean in like some weird hippie way that, oh yeah, we're all one, we're all connected. He means no, philosophically, every single thing is connected. When we say that every single thing is connected, what that should lead to us to also say is that there's no such thing as luck. Luck has no meaning in Islam. And somebody says, oh, what a weird coincidence. No such thing. Oh, this person was born and this person was born. Same exact time. Oh, what a coincidence. No such thing. Coincidence doesn't happen in Islam. They might think that, hey, these are completely independent. They have no relation whatsoever. He says that's impossible. There is no such thing as an independent event, an independent phenomenon. Nothing's independent. Which also then means that there's nothing unique in the world as well too. You might think, okay, I was born in a very specific time, in a specific place with specific parents. That makes me unique. And everything that's made is unique. Even if you look at grains of sand, every single grain of sand occupies a unique space, you might say, but no. Even here, he's saying that's not unique at all. And we'll explain why in a second. There's a fancy term that he said that the universe is indivisible. Indivisible in the sense that you can't just cut stuff up and separate everything. Now, we might look out at the world right now and say that, yeah, everything looks like it's separate. We don't see the connections as they are. That's our ghafla, our heedlessness. We're not seeing the connections that are there. Based on philosophical premises, every single thing is interconnected in this like big sort of web. Now we'll explain it now. So we'll explain it in two different ways. Which we kind of already did, but get rid of this. Okay, yeah, let me leave this up. Okay. So there's two different ways we can explain how everything is linked. The first one is based on what we said over here. We call it time or space. There's a space-time link between everything. So in philosophy, there's this principle, you don't have to know the Arabic, it's not important, but there's a principle, كُلُّ حَادِثٍ مَسْبُوقًا بِمَادَّةٍ وَمُدَّةٍ. Every single thing that emerges or happens or takes place, every occurrence, it's preceded, before it, you get madda, you have to have some materials, and mudda, you have to have time and duration. Meaning, you need space-time for things to happen. That's a simple principle in philosophy. Now, how do we understand that? Okay, well, we already talked about it over here. The example of a person needing parents, needing grandparents, this chain of going back of horizontal causes is showing us that at least for this line of individuals, however far back you go, that's clear we see a unity there. Whatever, let's just for example say that even if we don't want to bring in religious stuff, because even, most of you know that even in anthropology, they say that yes, there was the first humans, whatever you want to call them, right? I forgot the term they use for them, like apex or something like that. And that's where they said all the initial lines then come from. So even over here, they say, look, for this, and then that also means any other person, there's that unity at least over here of human beings and parents. So they have that. So one individual is linked this way, then to other individuals, they're linked from the same, ancestors or parents. Which means that in order for these ancestors to happen, there were other specific material causes. Food and sunlight, oxygen, this planet, forces of gravity, whatever it is. All of those things that were required led to this. So that means all of us every single thing here has the exact same needs that led to us being created in the first place. So that's one type of unity that he talks about. Another example outside of human beings. Let's go back to the burning idea. So let's say you have a fire that's burning. Now, what generally is required for a fire to burn? For something to turn into a fire? I'll write it in blue. Science people? Yeah, you need oxygen. Yeah, you need some sort of spark. So these are probably the two simplest elements we think about. But the what is it that he mentions here? A fire happening at, let's say, what time is it right now? 7:44. In order for a fire to even happen in the first place, like let's say at any point, time is also required. Right? So time has to exist in order for a fire to happen, to burn. You need the things that are required for a spark to emerge is required. What's required for oxygen, for that to emerge, that's required too. Again, materials we kind of already talked about, the other things in the environment, the things that allowed for all those materials to emerge. So all of these things were absolutely necessary just for this one fire to ignite. And that means any fire requires these specific chains to happen. All of these have, as we said, all these horizontal causes. You trace it back far enough, it's going to have the exact same thing that any ancestor needed as well too. So yes, you want to use scientific terms of the Big Bang? Fine, go ahead, use it. We have no problem with that. Fine, it all came from some singularity, which means everything shares in that singularity. It's not just humans that, yes, even a fire, let's say they were all born at the same exact time. All of these things, even though they are completely different types of things, two different humans, this is not even a human, it's a fire, they are all tracing back to the exact same initial sort of forces and materials and time that was required. So that's one type of link that Shaykh Mutahari mentions, that philosophers talk about. Everything is preceded by something else, so you go back to some single need or cause, whatever you want to call it. You don't even have to call it Allah yet, right? But everybody will have to allow for that thing to happen. Even if you want to trace it back infinitely, you can do that as well too. The point is that it's following the same chain. And that chain is kind of getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, that's one type. There's a second type that he talks about as well too, which is a little bit different. And he says this is when things are contemporaneous. Oops. Meaning happening at the same time. So it's similar to the fire and human example, but I want to give a different example. Let's say you have, write it down somewhere. Please recite salawat. Okay. Again, we're picking some specific day and time, right? So this is, whatever, October 5th, 2015, 9:30 p.m., for example, right? Let's say in one part of the world, you have a surgeon who's operating on a patient, right? In some other area, you have a mechanic who's working on a car. Do these things have any relation to one another? If we were to see them, like any other two events, say, no, there's no relation. Me sitting here doing this, you sitting here, online, wherever, and somebody ordering food at some restaurant. Any relation? Say, no, what relation is there? What Shaykh Mutahari is saying is that our view of reality is limited where we see the disconnected nature of it, disjointed nature. He says what we are not, for example, seeing is that, let's go back to the fire example. There was a car accident with a fire, and that car accident led some individual now to go sit on a hospital bed and has to go through surgery, and also caused their car to be sent to a mechanic to be repaired. So a single event triggered this plus multiple other factors. We don't see the interconnectedness, which is this accident, but without that accident, these two things don't happen. That surgeon to be operating on that individual and that mechanic to be working on that specific car all have the same horizontal cause in mind. And this horizontal cause of somebody getting to an accident, let's just, again, we're imagining a hypothetical, that person needed to be driving on a specific highway at a specific time to get into that accident. They needed to be going a certain speed, otherwise they would have missed the accident. They needed to have eaten a certain amount of food or whatever that led them to get into their car. They needed to have a certain thing happening in their life for them to have been going on the road at that specific time. They were born. Right? Every other factor now allows for this accident to even take place in the first place. So even these two events, which seem completely disconnected, are also all going back to this idea of these same ancestors as well too. So another analogy that's given is, to kind of help visualize it, is let's say you have a bunch of dominoes that split off into, like, 3 different tracks. If we just look at it from over here, that these dominoes are falling, like they seem like they're not related at all. Had we had a bigger picture, we would have been able to see that, hey, this one domino knocked down all 3 of these, which then led to everything else. If you cut this out of the picture, this doesn't happen. If this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. So again, what he's trying to show is, even here, there are specific events that take place which lead to everything else. Simple examples. Our creation, a rock forming, all of these are going back to single events as well too. So it's not just about human beings coming there or the planet coming. All of these first cause ideas that we have, all the horizontal ideas are actually connecting every single thing. If that first cause does not lead to the second cause, which doesn't lead to the third, again, we're still talking horizontally, then you don't get a surgeon doing this, you don't get a mechanic, you don't get a person eating at a restaurant, you don't get a bird flying, none of these things will happen. So there is no coincidence then. There's no coincidence that these two people are doing this, or that there's some random person at a restaurant, or some person dies, or some person is born, or somebody falls down, or there's a bird flying. Every single thing is related. There's a term a popular term you probably have heard before as well too, that describes this idea called the butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flaps its wings halfway across the world, and that leads to a tsunami somewhere else. It's not just some random saying, it's talking about in science they call it determinism. There's specific cause and effect things that take place. So it's not 100% in terms of how empiricists think about it, that, oh, that's it, there is no God anymore, nothing else, everything's already figured out by atoms and molecules and that's it. No, we're saying that these are all preparatory causes which are all needed, which all connect everything else. That's what Shaykh Mutahari wants to get across as well too. So that's the link. Everything, every event is flowing from one single cause that leads to everything else. Okay. There's maybe time for one other principle I think that we can probably do today. Let's see, if you recite a salawat. I know it's a bit heavy, but it'll make sense, again, in a few sections why this is necessary. And I'm sure there's already a question that's coming to your mind. Hey, if we have a single cause that's leading to everything else, all this is happening, where's my free will involved? So 2 sections later, he's going to address that. 2 or 3 sections later, he'll talk about how it's connected. But this is again why he wants to say, I need you to understand the order of things first, from vertical and horizontal, see how these causes work. Then we can, once you have the framework, then we can start explaining things like life and death and free will, all of these things. We'll talk about that. Okay. So remember, this is how philosophers operate. They don't just give an answer so that it satisfies somebody. They said, look, we have to change your framework so you see reality for what it really is. Once you see it from a deeper, higher level perspective, then everything kind of makes sense like a full puzzle, right? Okay. So the next thing he says is that, look, we have two different types of relativity, if you've heard the term before. Something can be a relative possibility, or it can be a relative necessity. And I'll explain that. Okay. Basically, these terms are the philosophical terms that are used to describe what we already talked about. When we see that the mechanic and the surgeon are both doing their jobs, it seems like they're not related. Is that thing that's happening, is it absolutely necessary that that surgeon now has to work on that person, that patient, and that mechanic has to work on that car? Is that necessary? It has to happen like that? Or is it just possible? That's how things ended up working out. So based on what was described, how would we explain reality? Is it something that has to happen the way things are, or no, it's just one possibility? It didn't have to happen like that. What do you think? Let me explain another way. So you have A. Okay? A has a relationship to B. Once A comes into existence, I'm going to try to think philosophically about this. When A comes into existence, does B have to happen, or is it only possible? Again, I'm using like philosophical mathematical terms. If we say, look, it can, it doesn't have to happen, that would be called possibility. If we say, no, it has to happen, then it would be necessity. So an example would be, again, I'm using simplistic examples. So a child is born. From person, we'll call them person X, and then X becomes a father. Is that a necessary relationship or a possible relationship?
Possible.
Sorry?
Possible.
Why so?
Because the child is born from X, but X may not necessarily become a father.
So, let's say this definitely happens. A child is born from X.
Sure.
Is it absolutely then the case that X, after that, becomes a father, or no? Is it only possible? Yeah. Why?
By definition.
By definition, right? Again, this is a very simplistic idea. Now, trying to think of a necessity. Problem is, if I use possible examples, it's going to throw away the whole idea that Shaykh Mutahari is trying to imagine. Okay, go like this. Another example. So someone eats Taco Bell. They get an upset stomach. Is that necessary? Is it a necessity, or is it possible? It's possible. So again, assuming somebody definitely eats, now it's highly likely, obviously, but it doesn't definitely have to happen, right? So this is just a simplified idea of saying when an event happens, does it automatically lead to something else? If it automatically leads to it, it's necessity. If it's possible, then relative possibility. What Shaykh Mutahari is trying to get us to understand is, when we're talking about the world now, again, that mechanic and the surgeon, that bird that's flying and some tsunami, whatever it is, are all of them this kind of relationship? Like, yeah, it's possible for that to happen, or is it absolutely necessary? Based on what we've talked about, what is he trying to prove and show us? Every single thing is necessary. Again, we said no coincidence, no luck. Nothing's happenstance or happen chance. Everything has to happen. Assuming A happens, B definitely has to happen. There is no other way around it. Again, this is leading us to say that this sounds like predestination then. It sounds like we don't have free will. That's why he said, look, let me show you how it works philosophically, then we're going to answer that in 2 sections later. Right? The whole world is governed by this relative necessity. The whole reality is governed like this. The reason, so one of the conclusions that comes out of it is, if something exists, it has to exist. Usually don't grab akhlaqi points from philosophy, but that means that every single one of us, Allah said it's absolutely necessary for us to exist. Absolutely necessary. If something doesn't exist, it has not been created, and it never will be created, that means that it is impossible, and it does not and it will not ever exist. So this should get us to think about the nature of our own creation, the nature of our lives, and everything that happens. That everything that we need to survive is being put in front of us by absolute necessity. It's not some chance. And again, this is different than the typical thing that Allah is always blessing me and guiding me. He is necessarily like wajib for him to put all this stuff for us, based on what he knows that you and I can become in terms of our kamal and our perfection. Linking back to what we've already talked about before, the justice of Allah, according to the philosophers, is what is allowing people who can become perfect to become perfect, for insan at least. Allah sees that there's a perfection possibility for us, so He's giving us everything that we need to do that. Now, whether we achieve it or not, that's where the free will discussion will come in, inshallah. So, what we think, I erased the dominoes. We think that everything is like this. You talk to the average person, they think that, it just happened. It was a coincidence. It doesn't have to happen, because they don't have this philosophical framework. That had to happen. Things had to happen exactly like this. Now, how do we prove all these ideas and all this interconnectedness? We did it in a very disconnected way, but Shaykh Mutahari, in the last part of this section, goes through the 4 philosophical principles or pillars that we have to understand. Now, because it's philosophical language, and I think we've gone through enough philosophy today, and I don't want to overwhelm everybody's brains and souls, I think we'll stop over here if there are any questions, and then next session, inshallah, we'll start by naming the 4 principles that are there. I'll name the principles, that way you can at least think about it for next week, and then I just won't explain it, that's all. Please recite a salawat. So, there are 4 pillars or 4 principles that kind of prove this idea or are necessary for this idea. The first one is the law of causality. Anybody know what the law of causality is? There's the mistaken simple way people think about it, and then there's the way that philosophers talk about it. The incorrect way is when people say everything has a cause, which is incorrect. The real law of causality is what? Everything that begins to exist, or every effect has a cause. Well, some people object to it. We'll explain their objections and what happens if they don't. But basically, every effect has a cause. It's just cause and effect, simple. That's it, right? So that's one pillar, one principle. The second one is what we kind of just talked about, is the necessary relationship, the necessity of cause and effect. When you have a specific cause, it'll necessarily lead to its effect. When you take all these elements together, everything that's needed for it, then that effect will absolutely come into existence. There's nothing that's stopping it. And again, that's with the assumption that everything that it needs is there. That's where we get that previous statement, right? That's where we say that anything that comes to exist has to exist because everything was present for it. The third is called correspondence. Which is related to what we talked about in the beginning. A leads to B, A has no relationship with C. That means that B cannot cause A. That doesn't make any sense. And that also means that C cannot cause A, or this. You can't just swap cause and effect stuff. Fire will only do what fire can do. Water or ice can only do what water and ice can do. And those have a specific effect on everything else in the world, and they have a specific relationship. So in other words, they can't swap abilities and powers, something like that. And then the final one is the idea of first cause. Everything goes back to a single cause. Go back as far as you want, there's going to be one single cause or source for everything else to happen. But inshallah, next week or next session, if Allah gives us tawfiq, we'll explain these a bit more in detail. We'll try to explain it and then also say that, some people might object to some of these. We'll explain what those objections are and why they don't make any sense. And then once we've given this full map, now that we have vertical order and then horizontal order, then we'll say, hold on, this still feels like very philosophical language. Like before we were using Quranic language for vertical order. Do we have a language in the Quran for the horizontal order? That everything is kind of happening exactly the way Allah's planning. And the way that Shaykh Mutahari says that it is described in the Quran as the Sunnatullah. The Sunnah of Allah. Allah has a specific way that He does everything. And then when we get to that subsection, we'll explain how this Sunnat of Allah, the way that He does things, as Allah Himself says that La tabdila li khalqillah, right? Or there's no change within the lan tajida lahu fi sunnatillah tabdila. You won't find a change in the Sunnah of Allah ever. So then we'll say, okay, He'll answer some of the objections there too, that, hold on, Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, if fire is supposed to burn, why didn't he burn them? Is that a change in law? Did Allah change His sunnah? Like what happens there? When we make dua, does that break horizontal order? Does that break vertical order? If I make a dua, am I changing something? How does that happen as well? And then again, the final point that we'll get to as well is if everything that exists based on all this is necessary, then how do we actually think about free will? So we'll inshallah talk about that next session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.